So, today we're going to talk about Hashimoto's and the triggers of inflammation. So, we know there are four main categories: dietary, environmental, which is toxins, chemicals, metals, lifestyle, sleep, stress, infections. But for today, let's dive into the dietary.
Food allergies in the classic sense would require somebody to have what's called the IgE response. This is going to be like the classic food allergy type of situation, peanut allergy, shellfish, whatever. You do catch these sometimes. It's very in the alternative or functional medicine world, this part is often dismissed, but in the conventional world, this is all that they actually look at. You go to allergists, either they do a skin prick test or a blood test to look for IgE allergies. Sometimes they catch something. Once in a while, you catch something, but this is in order to diagnose it as an allergy, you would have to have an IgE response. And most people know about this, but once in a while, you do catch some actual food allergies here and there. You could run them in a conventional laboratory, you know, the big name brand ones. Um, And again, it's often dismissed in functional world and maybe overemphasized in the conventional world. But I suppose this is not the biggest thing that you want to talk about, right? Most people want to talk about food sensitivities. In order for it to be a food sensitivity, we can call it a non-allergy food reaction, although I believe technically it's an immune response, so it should be classified as some sort of allergy, maybe like a slow allergy, not like a dramatic IgE response.
Mhm.
But you'll show up with what's called IgG. Classically, IgM is tested, and sometimes IgA is tested. But a lot of the labs, alternative lab companies will check IgM, whatever. But it's good to have, there's some labs that will check multiple. Important to note with this, these are commonly tested. You get a lot of false negatives, you get a lot of false positives. So for sure, it's not a perfect test. Some of the labs are better than others with their technology on how they do this. But this is kind of where the functional people live, right? In this food sensitivity type of world.
So, with sensitivity, can we move into cross reactivity?
Yeah, so cross-reactivity, you got to look at it as um, almost like a molecular mimicry, meaning if one food compound has a similar protein structure to another, your body can react to that, right? So there's a test in like Cyrex Labs, for example, that will test common cross-reactivity foods to gluten. This is particularly helpful in the Hashimoto's world because at this point, most people who would be searching here already understand that gluten's a problem, hopefully.
Hmm.
Now, it doesn't have to be, now it is still under tested, don't get me wrong. And a lot of times you get false negatives because if you go to, even if they're a doctor, like a conventional medical doctor is a little more up to speed on like food sensitivities and whatnot, they might check for um, transglutaminase, one part of the gluten thing, and but there's like a whole bunch of other isomers of gluten that often get missed. So if you check in a proper lab, so for example, Cyrex is one of the only ones I know of that actually checks for all the different kind of isomers of gluten or gliadin. Then they have another panel called cross-reactivity. So a lot of people who, even if they're off of gluten, are still getting food reactions because there's obviously more than that. But there's certain compounds that look like gluten, at least to the immune system, right? So these are some of the foods like certain beans have something called phytohemagglutinin in it. You'll get a lot of cross-reactivity with dairy for especially for Hashimoto's people. And then there's a whole other list of like chocolate and then all the other grains that people start eating once they go gluten-free, like amaranth, buckwheat, millet, rice, whatever. A lot of times those will show up as cross-reactive foods.
Hmm.
And
Can
they
you
get
talk?
missed a lot.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about maybe dyes, additives, and preservatives?
You want something that's cool. It's not really cool, but if there's food dye in a food, it delays the breakdown. So like let's say somebody has a gluten, we'll call it a sensitivity,
Hmm.
and the body breaks it down at a certain rate, meaning digestive enzymes win, they start breaking down the gluten proteins within there. If there's dye present, it makes it last longer. So therefore, you're getting longer exposure time to these sensitive or allergenic foods, right? Do you
Mhm.
ever see the kid with like the food dye with like the, the red tongue or whatever?
Mm.
Right. So like those are like embedded in the cells.
Said the rainbow bagel.
Yeah. Oh, it makes me sick. So exactly, that's the best example because you got the rainbow bagel with like, are they using natural food dyes? Um,
I don't
I
think
doubt
so.
it.
Yeah.
So then that gluten, which would break down at a certain rate, is going to break down much, much slower, exposing you to a longer exposure time to the gluten proteins.
Can you talk a little bit about molds?
Yeah, I'd love to. There's different types of mold reactions, and I think that probably warrants like a whole maybe 2 hour thing. But molds are going to be commonly present in foods that are commodities, foods that sit around for a while,
Mhm.
right? So maybe waiting for the pricing to get better. So like grains are particularly um, likely to get mold toxins built up as they sit somewhere dark and cold. Coffee is classic to have mold in it. Peanuts, a lot have mold because that soft shell on the outside, like corn, commonly, within that husk is going to develop mold because it's moist and dark in there. So you're like literally eating mold toxins when you have a lot of these foods,
Mhm.
that sit around for a while. There's even in agriculture world, they know about this. Like we're as natural doctors, we're often dismissed about the whole mold thing. It's overblown and blah blah blah. But in the agriculture world, like with feed for animals that are like expensive, they actually start to treat them now with binders and filler things that to absorb some of these mold toxins. But they're not doing that with humans, right? They
Right.
would have to admit it's a problem if they did that. But
Mhm.
yeah, you could actually see there's some videos online that show, and there's products, commercial products available that they just sell to farmers to feed the livestock. So yeah, so that's mold toxins. I mean, mold is like a huge topic, but
Mhm.
like one of the ones that people are exposed to every day maybe is just like your coffee or you're eating corn chips or
Yeah.
you're eating peanuts or things like that. You're just
Mhm.
like more than likely you're getting mold exposure.
Yeah.
Some people react a lot to it. Some people are like, I never have a problem with it. Like, all right, good for you. Doesn't mean it's good for you. But
Right.
some people, like me, are extremely sensitive to mold.
Yeah. Yeah. What about high glycemic foods?
This is obviously a problem, especially when people have blood sugar issues, like whether they're diabetic, pre-diabetic, or what have you. I think 40% of the US population, upwards of that, could be considered pre-diabetic, which
Yeah.
is scary. These things are going to cause spikes in blood sugar, which makes your insulin get dysregulated. When insulin gets dysregulated, it puts you kind of on the short list to get, dysglycemia or eventually diabetes. So, like, what is it? Why is that relevant to Hashimoto's? It's relevant to Hashimoto's is because a lot of these people have different types of glycemic reactions, like reactive hypoglycemia, meaning they eat carbs or sugar, and then everything spikes, and then they crash, right? And then they get brain fog in here, right? So if blood sugar goes up at this rate, insulin goes up, and it lasts longer. Like at that time where there's nothing for insulin to put in the cells, you're in like the blackout zone, and then that's when you crave like more sugar or caffeine or whatever, just to get you going. So high glycemic foods will have their own. This again, this is a huge topic. So high glycemic foods will also cause issues with inflammation, um, even independent of somebody being diabetic, right? There's something called the rage reaction, which I think we could do a whole nother thing about. So high glycemic foods are a problem for everyone as human beings, at least when you're having chronic exposure to them. Like on Christmas once a year, not that big a deal, but like
Right.
for some Hashimoto's people, you can get blown out from having a high glycemic day for days, and you might be inflamed, and you don't put two and two together, right? The fact that 2 days ago you ate a bunch of high glycemic foods, and then all of a sudden, like you got brain fog and you're fatigued, and nobody
Right.
really puts it together unless you're tracking,
Mhm.
which is why it's probably important for at least early on for Hashimoto's people when they're figuring this stuff out to track their foods, keep a journal, or like what'd you eat, how do you feel, and then you can go back like 2 3 days and like, oh yeah, I ate at a restaurant that day, so what could it have been?
What about pesticide coated produce?
We're all getting it. I think it's pretty ubiquitous at this point that we're all getting exposed to pesticides. Even if you eat all organic, it's really hard to, I mean, you do what you can to try to mitigate exposure. But this again is going to cause, like, there's certain ones, I guess we can name by name, right? Like glyphosate and whatnot.
Yep.
In the US, we still use something called atrazine, right?
Yep.
And so these things will cause leaky gut in their own right. Meaning leaky gut, meaning uh, what's called permeability. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like in the cells of your intestine, you get some of these food proteins, you get exposure to glyphosate. It causes with this protein called zonulin to be released, and then you get these food compounds pouring into the bloodstream that are supposed to be broken down before they get to the bloodstream, right? Like digestive protein is not supposed to get into the bloodstream unless it's broken down into amino acids, right? So now you're getting immune exposure to these proteins, which were never really designed to,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like we'll just keep it for gluten right now. It's simple. Like maybe you didn't have a reaction before, but maybe gluten plus glyphosate pouring it into your bloodstream is going to cause some sort of reaction that is not necessarily going to go away. It's a big deal, these pesticide types of products, and we're just talking about the big ones like glyphosate and nitrogen, but there's dozens more.
We haven't touched on nightshades.
This is one that nobody wants to talk about. Right? It's another because it's a hassle. Now, it is not an allergy. Now, that being said, you can have a food sensitivity to anything that has protein in it, right? So somebody can legit be sensitive to, like, say, tomatoes or
Mm-hmm.
potatoes, whatever. Especially in potatoes, also on that cross-reactive list that you talked about before,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because a lot of these gluten-free foods have potato starch
Yeah.
and whatnot. Potato starch very concentrated.
Mm-hmm.
So nightshades can cause inflammation just from some of the compounds in there, like it's called alpha solanines. So alpha solanine technically is a poison. So all plants have certain levels of plant poisons in them, right? But we can deal with it for the most part. But some people are just more sensitive to the solanines in the nightshades. There's more to it than solanines. There's something else called aquaporins and whatnot. But solanines is going to be the big one that's inflammatory. And you know what? There's no test for this. You can see if you're actually sensitive to tomatoes or potatoes or eggplant or peppers or whatever. Um, but there's no actual check test for are you having a reaction to nightshades. So this requires good old elimination and provocation. And you go off of it for X period of time in order long enough for your body to clear out the stuff that's in your system already, see how you feel. But the big deal comes when you put it back in.
So
And then you'll
how long do you have to get rid of it?
like, I don't have the exact date, but I always, in the practice, like when I work with patients, I would ideally like to see 2 weeks clean.
2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, it's long enough for you to put it back in and see if there's a reaction.
What about alcohol and processed oils?
But these are big in the influencer world right now, right?
Mm-hmm. No
Um,
seed oils.
yeah, no seed oils, and we've been on this for
Long
what,
time.
20 something years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's one of those things where it's kind of you have to be part-time job to not have any seed oils. But
Mm-hmm.
it's going to come back to, I think you made a video at one point about omega 3s and balance and things like that. What it comes down to is there's certain omega 6s that aren't, you actually need some omega 6s, but it's better to get it from actual food rather than concentrated oil,
Right.
right? So there's some omega 6 oils, that are very good for you, like take black currant seed oil, for example, or even primrose oil, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those actually have some good properties too, but it really comes down to balance. Right. So, like, is somebody gonna have a huge reaction if they have a little bit of seed oil exposure? Probably not if they're balanced, right? If they're taking and balancing out their omega 3 to omega 6 ratios. The
Mm-hmm.
average American, it's like they've done samples with, you know, um, they found fecal samples from like whatever thousands of years ago, and they found the ratio from there, they were able to test this was like 1 to 1 of what they consumed, omega 3 to omega 6, right? And you can there's a blood test for this actually, um, kind of omega 3 test. They're all called different things in different labs, but even at commercial labs you can get this. But So I think the average American is like 16 to 1
Yeah.
of inflammatory oils to
Mm.
omega-3 oils.
Yeah.
It's pretty
Wow.
bad. Like you're not going to take two omega-3s and balance it out.
Yeah.
Right. So
Right.
obviously if you could eliminate seed oils, that's great. I do have a lot of people who react heavily when they go out to dinner.
Yeah.
And even if they're like super strict about gluten exposure and things, like the only thing it could be is either one or two things, which I think we'll touch on maybe, which would be excessive salt or
Mhm.
just the seed oils that are cooked in them. And you do get, so if you do get that, kind of watch out for gallbladder problems too, because your gallbladder's processing all that fat.
Well, my next question was going to be the high heat cooking oils.
Okay, so this is another thing that it's a big deal for some people. It's not a big deal for other people. But when you cook at high heat, you get what's called um, like advanced glycosylated end products, AGEs. It's basically like sugaring your blood cells, right? So they measure people with blood sugar issues. They measure HA1C. That's like how much glycosylation, like how much glucose damage your cells are undergoing,
Right.
right? And some is normal because we need that. When you're consuming high heat foods, you're getting a lot more of that. And those things are linked to like colon cancer and all this other bad stuff. So you do once in a while, why I think it's important to address it. It's not like the first thing you would do,
Right.
right? But for sure, it's worth cooking at low temp for a month and see how you do. Whether
Mhm.
you do like slow cooker or sous vide or just boiling rather than like high heat. But they've done a bunch of studies where they use like charred meat versus boiled meat, and there were more inflammatory markers in the charred meat people. So we know it has an impact.
Hashimoto's people like grilling is not good.
I wouldn't make it my prime source of
Okay.
cooking.
Okay.
Yeah, that's like another special occasion situation.
Right. 4th of July barbecue, and that's it.
Right. Hmm.
Yep.
Cool, whatever. Can I throw the salt one in here?
Sure.
Because I wrote it down. Um, as you probably know, and you've been using like good salt forever, but regular sodium chloride table salt, like like the bad stuff that you get,
Right.
um, doesn't have other minerals to balance it out. It's just pure sodium chloride, and even worse for Hashimoto's people, a lot of it's iodized. So most people will say, and other people who are iodine enthusiasts who don't follow the research would say, well, you need iodine for the thyroid, but you need trace micrograms of iodine for thyroid function.
Mhm.
So if you're getting iodized salt and you're taking like a multivitamin or a thyroid supplement that has, 400 micrograms of iodine in it, that is enough to cause a trigger, such to the point where there's been studies on iodine restriction diets helping Hashimoto's people. I just talked to somebody last week and they did that and it helped them. So um, they've done iodized salt to try to limit goiters, right? Because in certain parts of the world where there's like no iodine readily available in their food, they tend to have goiters. But actually, now the number one cause of goiter is Hashimoto's.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the sodium itself is obviously a trigger for high blood pressure and things like that. So if people are going to use salt, they have to use like good, healthier salts.
Mhm.
And really, you don't want to overdo it because it's been shown in some research that sodium chloride itself can trigger autoimmunity. This all sounds depressing. Like there's all these things, and I can't eat anything, right? But which is why I think it's important to work with somebody who could take you through a process to kind of figure out what's the most important thing
Yep.
rather than get overwhelmed to try to cut all this stuff out.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's things for Hashimoto's people or for autoimmune in general that they're going to have like the common foods
Mhm.
where you might put them on a certain type of diet. And I don't like to run food sensitivity tests right off the bat because I have no confidence that their immune system is competent, right? Because if you do it right away, if their immune system or what's called the secretory IgA is very suppressed, it's like part of your immune system in your gut, then you might show up positive for nothing.
Right.
Those are
Right.
false negatives. And I think that's sucky. One, because you spent 500 on a test.
Right.
And two, um, you might think, like, oh, see, I don't have a problem with gluten, dairy, corn, soy, whatever.
Right.
When you do, your immune system is just so suppressed.
Right.
Or you might get somebody who also has like some other inflammatory bowel things, and their sec IgA is very high. And
Yeah.
then you check them, and out of 99 foods, they show up for 79, and that's overwhelming too.
Right. Right. Right.
Which we've seen that. And then you got to do like a full gut repair in order to get that back on track. But that's why I just answered a question that you didn't ask, but it was like why I think running a food sensitivity panel prematurely can often be frustrating and, and a waste of money, especially if somebody's trying to budget tests. Like all of these tests are not covered tests.
Right.
Average food, like the best food sensitivity test, I believe, is Cyrex. Because you want to know an interesting thing? Like you eat cooked food mostly, right? But sometimes you eat raw food.
Right.
Almost every lab tests raw foods.
Oh, interesting.
So is there a difference between raw and cooked foods? I would say yes.
Of course.
Um,
Yes.
but Cyrex array 10, some of those foods cooked and some raw,
Okay.
and they show up different.
Yeah. I bet. All right.
Hope this was helpful, and I think next time we'll get into maybe environmental.
Environmental. Yeah.
All right,
Excellent.
sounds great.
All right.